Welcome back to Thomas Still Garage. Right back on the Merc. I've been hammering this car and we're gonna keep going. Let's go. All right, my primary microphone system is down and is at road getting repaired right now. So bear with me on the audio. I'm using the standby stuff. And by the time this video comes out, we should have the microphone system back up and running. So between the last video and today, I've been doing a lot of stuff. Get you caught up on that and then we're gonna keep going. So, radiator mounts, stainless TIG welded. I'm an amateur TIG welder at best. Good days and bad days. I learn every time I weld with that thing. I am proud to say that 99% of this car I've built myself. The only things that I haven't made and welded myself are the motor mounts, which I wish I would have made, and the lower intercooler supports, which were so nice that it was already an existing product, so I bought it. But everything else, exhaust, brackets, everything I've made, so I'd rather it be mediocre and I made it myself than just buy it. I get better every time, so keep going there. Let's see, what else have we got? I went ahead and pulled the downpipe. We've got an exhaust gas temperature probe now. We've got the ECU 4-wire sensor in there, and I have a bung welded in now for the wideband gauge. So should have been the last time hopefully I've dropped that exhaust. Picked up a Vibrant 90-degree cast aluminum coupler here to get this air intake to where it clears the headlight. I don't really want to go down with it because I'm going to drive this car in the rain and I don't want to suck rain up into my turbo. And so not sure if it's going to stay like that, but that is the MAF system, and we'll recirculate the blow-off valve to this coupler right here. It'll be behind the MAF. And let's see, where are we at? I made some simple brackets for the intercooler. I've just got to weld these to the intercooler bracket support, or the intercooler support brackets here. We've got rubber isolators on both sides. And I started mocking up wiring, which is a whole process, but you can see here where we're at. We've got this Joe's switch panel here, and we've wired it up: main, fuel, accessory, and fans. And right here you can see I'm using negative trigger relays, and we've got ECU main, accessories, fuel, oil cooler fan, radiator fans. Now my fans are actually going to be controlled by this little computer right here that's standalone, but I wanted a way to manually turn the fans on in case that fails, or if the car is just getting hot and I want to run the fans in the pits or something. Also, the ECU harness I have will actually control fans, so we have redundant backups, but I'm not going to use the ECU to control the fans. I'm going to use my standalone computer and my manual switch. So wiring is well on its way. I went ahead, I've got all the negative triggers kind of wired, laid out, but I went ahead and drew up a little mounting plate and had it cut by Send Cut Send, and it looks like it's going to work pretty trick. And when this is installed, it's going to sit perfectly in the spot that the ashtray used to go. I'll end up taking this piece of wood trim for the ashtray and putting it on here, and we'll kind of tie it back into the original interior. Remember, this piece down here is going to be the same wood as this, so I think that'd be pretty cool. Get in the car, ECU main on, fuel pumps on, start the car. Accessories will power my gauges, radio, accessories, stuff like that. And then if I want to manually turn on the fans, boom. And the negative triggers, there's no power going to it, it's just a ground. Pretty excited about it. I got this little check engine light here, which the ECU has provisions for, and I think I'm going to install this check engine light on this panel. I think I'm going to rivet this switch panel to this spacer plate that I made, and then we'll use self-tapping screws to put it into the center console, into the ashtray plastic. Alright, one of the things I like to do before I completely wire a car is just mock each circuit up while it's all easy to access and just test that my wiring theories are correct. So We got wires everywhere and it looks awful, but we've got the main systems wired up so that we can test them out here. And all we're looking for is basic function. So main, that should power engine harness, track, the drive-by-wire throttle, and the ECU, ignition, all of it. All right, I heard the throttle solenoids, or the throttle servos, whatever you want to call them, activate. So we're getting power there. Turn that off. Fuel. Oh yeah, fuel pump's going. Accessories, for now, this should just power up my gauges. Oh yeah. Temperature gauge is already working, 84 degrees in here, nice. That is actually going to our transmission oil temp, whatever. But there's no fluid in there right now, so the sensor's just atmosphere. That's connected to the head on the motor, which is showing 80 degrees, EGT 200, doesn't make any sense, probably have to calibrate it. Whatever, gauges work. And fans. Now again, this is just this is a manual override for my oil cooler fan and my radiator fan. Perfect. All right, well, in theory, all I gotta do is add all the fluids to this motor and we can test fire it. I want to get the power steering system done and the coolant system done first, but I am curious though to see if my starter key actually hazard switch, if it turns the starter. Just gonna bump it real quick. It does not. So I have to work on my starter wiring. Pretty exciting moment here. I want to put 3 quarts in the oil, or in the motor. Takes 6, actually could probably get away with 7. But I'm going to put 3 in the crankcase and get oil in the motor because it's exciting. Look at it, there it goes. And then the last 3 I'm going to pressurize and get in, and we're gonna wait for that. But before we fire the motor, we're gonna pressurize 3 quarts and put it in, but I just want to have 3 in the pan. That's 5W30 going in here. Oh great, I spilled some down the side of the motor, that's good. Okay, I don't think the issue is the ECU wiring, I think the issue is Merc wiring. So I just want to hear the starter come over just a second. Make sure the starter works. Boom. Starter works. Bunch of random things done today. 2 points I want to bring up. It is super easy when you go hard on a project to get burnout. And you got to know when you're feeling burnout, and you got to walk away. There's nothing wrong with taking a break, walking away. Some days you just got to do it. Put the tools down, forget about the car, go do something else. I'm kind of having one of those days today. I got a bunch of little things done, but I'm just not feeling it today. And I've learned that if I just come back on a fresh day, fresh brain, fresh mind, it's better, right? Unless you know, don't have a choice, you're like, gotta have the car running by tomorrow or something. But the other thing I want to bring up is small victories. Really, there was no need for me to power this stuff up today. I just needed it. I needed to see small signs of life. And honestly, something stupid like seeing the new gauges power up, or hearing the track motors fire up on the throttle body, like hearing the starter work, putting oil in the motor, those little things, man, I feel I needed it. I need it. So I'm gonna go get my daughter to call it done for today, and I'll see you guys in magical camera land in like 2 seconds. We're gonna switch gears a little bit. So this is the Mercedes power steering pump pressure line. and this is the return line. Now from Mercedes factory, the pressure line has a crimp that goes around this collar and crimps the hose on so it can't come off. Mercedes is known for doing that on older Mercedes. A lot of times you can turn what appears to be a non-rebuildable line into one by just cutting the fitting off, and you get a regular fitting that we're used to seeing. What's interesting is the return line on the Mercedes used just a regular worm gear, and the pressure line had a crimp. You'd think they would have just crimped both since they had the ability to do so. But anyways, what's weird too is the pressure line is 3/8 and the return line is 10 millimeter, and getting a hold of a 10 millimeter crush fitting in the States is kind of hard. So I ordered a 10 millimeter to AN6 crush fitting from the UK, and my plan is to just cut the end of this pipe off and put a crush type fitting right here to convert this into AN6. Same thing with this. I don't have to cut anything here, and this is 3/8, so I can put a crush fitting here, and then that allows me to just use factory connections on the power steering pump, and then everything else can be universal and AN6 fittings. So, which AN6 is basically 3/8, but I think this will work. Put this little, the way these work is these little collars go over the pipe, the hard pipe, and then this piece and this piece, when you tighten them together, it crushes this copper or brass collar here into the hard pipe and creates a leak-free seal, which is how I did all my fuel lines. So I think it's kind of hokey, but I think that's going to work. So we'll have the pressure side and the return side, both will be AN6. It'll be easy to connect lines to, and power steering, the hardest part of converting the power steering is done. So I'm just waiting on a fitting from the UK to be able to do both of those. This is the IS300 pump, but the IS300 reservoir wouldn't work because the GTE style intake manifold sticks out, whereas the IS300 went that way. So I could have cut that up, cut the reservoir up and welded it and used that, but I'm just going to get a universal reservoir, and I'm probably going to mount it right here. And there's a few companies that sell fittings here that convert this into a nice A feed, and then the return line right here used a banjo fitting, but that banjo fitting was just to feed a sensor. So it's M16 by 1.5, I believe. So that'll just be a simple M16 1.5 with a seal washer out to AN6. That'll go to the pressure side of the pump, and then the return will go up to the reservoir, and then the reservoir will feed into the top of the pump right here. And I want to have this done before we start the motor, because it's really not very hard to burn up a power steering pump. So I want to have fluid going into that, because this pump, I mean, in theory the motor only had 60,000 miles on it. It might leak, but in theory the pump should be fine. So I got my couplers and adapter fittings for the coolant hopefully arriving today, and I would like to be able to have the cooling system checked off. Then we'll move on to power steering. Once we get that one checked off, the last system left before we, no kidding, try to fire this motor is the intercooler pipes here. And then I just got to tie up, there's no vacuum lines on this at all right now, so I'm going to need vacuum feed to the wastegate. I'm going to need vacuum to the blow-off valve. I'm going to have to cap off all these open ports. We do need a throttle cable, but I'm not worried about that right now. I want to hear the motor run before we get crazy with anything else. So we're real close, real close. All right, well, we got the upper here, 1.25 inch into a reducer for 1.5 inch to 1.25 inch over to 1.5 inch. And it sits pretty nice. Is it perfect? No. Is it gonna work? Yes. Saves me from doing a bunch of aluminum fabrication. And it's serviceable. And then down here, it's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can get this out of your way. You can see the stock IS300 hose. I just cut it, and then as much as it pains me to use these universal hoses, this one's at least got a spring in it, and there's 1.5 to 1.75 inch reducer there. So, I mean, that's at least serviceable. I can get both of those at a parts store. These I can't get at a local parts store because they're tight 90s, but they're really nice high-grade 4-ply silicone from Pegasus. I don't think I'll have a problem with that. We got 5/8 Up to a 3/4 reducer, 3/4 into the Mercedes. So this is the return out of the heater core into the back of the block of the 2J. 2J uses 5/8 hose. Currently we have the pipe off the water pump because the pipe is too close to this wastegate exhaust. So we're gonna try to heat it with MAP gas, bend it back a little bit. Some MAP gas here. This is stainless. My neighbor Dennis and I, we're gonna try to heat this up. Got to be real careful with stainless because it'll crack. We're gonna try to heat this up and just bend it back a few degrees this way to get it away from that wastegate. This is 5/16. That used to go to the throttle body, I think, but the 5/16 barb that comes out back here, I'm gonna run behind the motor with 5/16, and I'm just gonna tap it into the 5/16. It's at the bottom of this water jacket right here. So that'll just free flow, and the outlet of the heater will come back to the motor, and then up here in the front, this is the Mercedes temperature control, and that'll come out of the back of the heater pipe around. I'm gonna have to use a clamp up here to keep the hose away from the turbo, and that'll go back another 3/4, 5/8 3/4 reducer, come in through this heat adjustment valve into the on-off valve back here, and then the heater core is, it's already fed to the heater core, so I just have to connect it here. So that'll come out the back of that pipe, which I'll have to use some clamps to keep the hose safe. But again, I'm going to drive this car, and I don't have air conditioning, but despite what you may think, it gets cold in Tennessee in the wintertime. At least for us Tennesseans, it gets cold. So I want my heat. You know what I'm saying? Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, let's get caught up here. Lower coolant hose is attached, upper coolant hose is attached. Stock Mercedes pressure feed into the heater. The source comes out of the 2JZ pipe, 5/8 reducer to the 3/4 into the Mercedes. The 5/16 nipple on the heater hose goes around the back of the block under the intake and connects to the bottom of the water jacket here. That I believe that used to be for the throttle body flow. So we're just recircling that. The return on the heater comes out of the Mercedes stock 3/4 inch hose, reducer 5/8 into the back of the block on the 2J. Coolant system is done. I've got a little plug on here. We're about to pressure test the whole system. And then, time for coolant! Just had a freaking monsoon here. Had to rush the truck inside the shop. It had pea-sized hail, no damage. My neighbor Dennis and I are working on the cooling system. So, pressurized the cooling system. We had a leak. We could not figure out where it was coming from. Well, it ended up coming from this Mercedes heater valve right here. We bypassed it and it held pressure. I filled the whole system with water. Doesn't cost me any money to find a leak with water, not coolant. So I'm draining the radiator right now. And then I'm gonna pull, probably can't see it, but if you see, there's a little nipple hanging off the block right there with some tape on it. That's actually a block drain. So once the radiator's drained, I'm gonna drain the block. And I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up and route it better, and then after that, the cooling system is done, pressure tested, ready for coolant. What's funny is the Mercedes uses this super weird like pulse system. It uses this impeller to pulse coolant towards the heater core based off the demand rate that you select. And this little seal was just not holding pressure anymore. I can probably rebuild this, but do I really want to? Probably not. So right now, this little modulator valve for selecting temperature, these fail generally, they're designed to fail open where the heater will run full hot. And when you select a cooler temperature inside on the HVAC panel, it closes a piston, which limits the amount of coolant going in there. So I'm gonna keep this because it was working when the car stopped, but that was almost 2 years ago. So if this ends up failing too, then I'm going to end up just ditching the 2 Mercedes valves altogether, and I'm going to run an electric valve like I do in the DeLorean, and we'll just get rid of this altogether. But I do want to maintain heat. Heater core is not leaking, that's good. So I think we're okay here. So we're going to have heat. We'll still be able to modulate temperature. We just won't have this little unnecessary valve up here anymore. I'm going to go ahead and do something bold here and sign off something on the board. Cooling system. Okay, my marker's dead, but you get here. Cooling system. Okay, that didn't work either. The cooling system is done. Stupid. All right, engine harness is wired. Relay block is wired. Well, not final wired. Gauges tested, those work. Interior reassembly, yeah, we'll get to it. Fluids, it's got engine oil in it, but not all the engine oil. It still needs trans oil and coolant. Diff, gotta check diff level. Trans output shield, I'm not gonna do. Intercooler system. So really, trans lines are done. Headlights gotta be installed. Trans tunnel patch made. Throttle cable. Center console wood. My neighbor Jason's working on that. So I mean, if you want to really get down to the nitty gritty, we need a power steering system. We need an intercooler pipe system. Then we're ready to fire. Okay, cooling system is done, minus an overflow tank and actually putting fluid in it. But we tested it with water. We found one leak, eliminated the valve that was faulty here. We still have the temperature control valve, and we'll just have to kind of pressure. I'm assuming Mercedes put that there because the heater core is higher than the radiator, so it assisted in keeping air bubbles out of the coolant, out of the core. But we'll just treat this like a DeLorean, and we're going to pressure fill it, so that should help that. And I'm just going to use Japanese or Toyota red or pink, whatever they have at the store. Premix has gotten so expensive. I'm just gonna buy concentrate and mix it myself. But next thing that I can do in the meantime is this puny little negative, this is 8-gauge cable, was the ground for the battery in this Mercedes, and it is so corroded, it's unbelievable. I mean, that's all green through it, it's rock hard. So we're gonna ditch that in the trash can. And I'm going to do like I did on the DeLorean. I'm going to get rid of this battery cable too, because I pulled that off the shelf when it's one of those nickel plated copper garbage. Alright, so I'm going to make my own battery cables for this car, ground straps, whatever. I like to use 4-gauge welding wire, pure copper. It's cheaper, you can buy it in bulk, and it conducts way better than those nickel copper plated garbage ones you'll get at parts stores. You just need basic tools, a pair of diagonal cutters, a good sharp knife or X-Acto, a big hammer. You can buy expensive crimp pliers. I have no issues using these old anvil style lug crimpers here. You just stick the battery cable in there and give it a good whack. Heat shrink tube, some lugs, and it's real simple. Real simple. Stick our heat shrink tubing on here. Take our nice little fresh end. Take our tool. Sometimes it's easier to just set the lug in where you want it. It's pretty good right there. Feed this dude right in here. Hold the outside of the tool so it doesn't slip away. Give it a good whack. Zig-a-zag! Zig-a-zaga! Alright. Look at that. A little off center, but that puppy's not going anywhere. Gah-gah-gah! Then we just take that little heat shrink tube, steal a lighter from the kitchen. Oh, come on. Every single time. Alright, take the other side here, stick my cable in. Sweet. You got a good solid connection. And there you have it. This is way more better than what the Merc had for its negative ground cable. Didn't cost me that much to make. These little anvils are like 15-20 bucks and they work. Or you can buy really expensive crimp pliers. They all do the same thing. Okay, I know there's at least one classic Mercedes fan out there watching this build just burning inside, super angry because Mercedes people, I hate it when people modify Mercedes. But this is the kind of stuff about stock Mercedes that you'll never sell me on. These 3 dinky little wires right here, they're like 2 10-gauge wires and 1 like 16-gauge wire. They power the entire car. This was the feed off the starter to all the separate little harnesses that run to the car. It's cloth. It doesn't age well. It's brittle. It's garbage. It's why a lot of classic Mercedes have wiring issues. And in my opinion, the wiring is overcomplicated. It's garbage. The grounds aren't adequate on the car. If you have a classic Mercedes and you want to keep it stock, you can do yourself a lot of favors by at least upgrading your power supply cables and your main grounds on the car, believe me. So I'm ditching that. And this is the way I like to do it. So we're going to do a 4-gauge feed off the alternator, and then the power distribution block 4-gauge to the battery. So the car is going to have good clean wire. Everything I've taken off this car has just been not flexible at all. For now, I put a simple RV battery strap in here to hold this battery. I changed my lugs out to new lugs because they're kind of beat up, and I went with a rear post style here. I've got a brand new 4-gauge ground to the body. I've got a brand new 4-gauge power cable. It's actually the right length going to the starter. And let me just say, like, all this mess here, I'm not cleaning this up till I hear the motor run. Once the motor runs, then I'm going to go through here and I'm going to actually rewire, make things pretty, secure cables, and like get this thing ready for the road. But it's just easier to be able to access all the circuits for when you have problems. So now what I'm getting ready, the wire I just did comes off the alternator right there, comes up the chassis here, and then feeds down into that. This guy right here is a power distribution block for the Mercedes. So goes to that block, and then another cable comes up here. So we'll have solid new cables feeding the battery and the power to the body. And then what I'm going to do is make a big 4-gauge ground cable that follows the same route as the positive cable. It's going to come over here and connect to the engine ground harness, which in EFI, anytime you're dealing with modern ECUs, sensors and all that, it's best to ground them direct to the battery. So this little harness here has 5 ground points on the block, and then it's going to meet a 4-gauge ground that goes all the way straight to the negative battery post. Okay, we have wired the car power anyway. We got a 4-gauge wire off the alternator. Comes up to, I decided to put a battery master cutoff switch inside the car for storage, theft, whatever. Stole it from my DeLorean's parts bin. Battery on off, nice industrial switch. And we have 4-gauge ground to the body, 4-gauge ground to the motor chassis. We've got 4-gauge power, 4-gauge power, 4-gauge power, RV strap here. So the battery side of it is done. Now I'm working on cleaning stuff off. We mounted the MAF here. I've cleaned up this inner fender. I'm going to rewire and tuck all this stuff so it's hidden, and start running sensor wires instead of just having them laying here. And we can start eliminating Mercedes stuff that we don't need. But coolant system's ready for coolant. Electrical system's ready to final wire, but again, I want to hear the motor run for at least a minute before I final wire everything. So it's going to stay messy here for a little bit. Really, I got to order power steering parts, and I got to order intercooler pipe couplers and pipes and stuff. And then we can put transmission fluid in. We'll pressurize the engine oil, put power steering fluid in, put coolant in, and we're ready to fire. Okay, we're recording. Just point the camera at me. Okay, hold on to that. We're gonna start filling coolant up, okay? Here we go, ready? Every bucket I have leaks. Why is that? Huh? Why does every bucket I have leak? still, that's all the way. Hold on. It's full. Okay, now we gotta try to save the rest of that coolant from that leaky bucket. Yep, it's full. See, can you look down in there? Right in this hole right here? Right here. You see it? Here. See it?
Yeah.
That's coolant, yeah. Alright, I gotta try to save what's left of this coolant because it's all leaking out of this bucket. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, what am I doing right now?
Putting that.
I'm putting transmission fluid in the transmission, right?
Yeah.
So we've already put 2 quarts in. I want to put a total of 4 quarts in without making a giant mess everywhere, which is... So what I have here is one of those cheap transmission fillers from Walmart. It's like $4. You can turn it on and off. It helps. Still leak and stuff, but...
Look.
Hey, there you go. Point it. You can screw these right on top of here. And they still leak, but it's more controlled than just pouring it in a funnel. And you can slowly open the valve here to let fluid out. And you gotta fill these A340s really slow. Okay, here we go. Let's put number 3 in. Okie dokie, well we got 4 quarts of transmission fluid in, coolant's in, engine's got 3 quarts of oil in it. We'll pressurize another 3 quarts before we start it. We just need power steering fluid now and an intercooler pipe set up. And once we are ready to fire the motor, we'll pressurize 3 quarts into it, and we will, as soon as the motor runs for like a minute or two, we're gonna kill it, and we'll try to feed another 4 to 6 quarts of transmission fluid in. Then we'll run it again. Hopefully all the pressures, everything looks good, and we can see if the transmission's any good, but let's just see if the motor runs first.
That's all for this week. It's time to show garage.
All right, we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.